For nearly 30 years, a mother wept and prayed for a son who seemed lost forever. Brilliant, charming, led astray by errors and false doctrines, deaf to every plea. Any other woman might have given up. She did not. What if we told you that those tears not only saved her son, but gave the Church one of her greatest saints and doctors? This is the story of Saint Monica, the mother who overcame through prayer what she could not overcome with words. Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city or country you are joining us from today. It brings us joy to know how far devotion to Saint Monica reaches, and if you carry an intention in your heart, a wayward child, a loved one you pray for, a conversion you await against all hope, leave it in the comments as your prayer request as well. Let us place all these intentions together under the protection of this tireless mother, who knows well what it means to wait and weep for those we love. If this story touches your heart, stay with us until the end. Chapter 1. A mother who prayed without ceasing. There are saints who conquered kingdoms, others who wrote immortal books, and others who shed their blood for the faith. Saint Monica did none of these things. Her greatness was something else, more hidden and perhaps more difficult, that of a mother who loved, waited, and prayed without ceasing year after year for the salvation of a son. Her weapon was neither the sword nor brilliant words, but persevering prayer and the silent tears of one who never gives up. And yet that humble woman stands behind one of the greatest men in the history of the Church, Saint Augustine, bishop, doctor of the Church, and one of the most influential thinkers of all time. For before Augustine was a saint, he was a lost son, and before he wrote his immortal works, there was a mother who brought him back to God through the force of her prayers for him. The story of Saint Augustine cannot be understood without the story of Saint Monica. The most beautiful thing is that nearly everything we know about her comes from Augustine himself, in his most famous work, the Confessions. There, already converted and serving as a bishop, he devotes moving pages to his mother, her faith, her tears, and her holy death. This, then, is not a story of legend or rumor, but the grateful testimony of a son who acknowledges that after God, he owed the best of himself to his mother. Monica's very name has become forever linked to one idea, that of a mother who prays for her children. That is why she is venerated as the patron saint of Christian mothers, suffering wives, and all who pray for the conversion of a loved one. In her, everyone with a child, spouse, or friend who has drifted from God can see themselves and learn never to despair but to trust and persevere in prayer. Her feast is celebrated on August 27th, one day before that of her son, Saint Augustine, whose feast is on August 28th. The Church has joined them in the calendar as they were joined in life, first the mother, who prepared the way with her tears, then the son, the fruit of those tears and a glory of the Church. Mother and son, side by side, forever. It is worth saying from the outset, honestly, where what we know about her comes from. Most of it comes from St. Augustine's Confessions, a first-hand testimony, sincere and restrained, worthy of complete trust. Other details have reached us through tradition and the devotion of the faithful, who over time have embellished her story. Throughout this account, we will simply distinguish what Augustine himself tells us from what belongs to popular devotion, so that we may honor the saint in truth rather than exaggeration. To understand the greatness of Saint Monica, we must know her story from the beginning, a story that did not begin in glory, but in the simplicity of a home in North Africa, where a little girl was learning to love God. Let us return there to her early years in the city of Tagaste. Chapter 2. The young girl from Tagaste, Monica, was born around the year 332 in Tagaste, a city in North Africa, in the region that is now part of Algeria and was then part of the Roman Empire. She was born into a Christian family, and from childhood she was raised in the faith by an elderly household servant, a woman of great virtue who had also cared for Monica's father and who brought up the girls with firmness and love. From that simple woman, Monica learned piety, discipline, and the fear of God. Augustine himself recounts in the Confessions an episode from his mother's youth that reveals her character completely. While she was still a girl, Monica was responsible for going down to the cellar to draw wine from the jars. Little by little, almost as a game, she began secretly taking small sips, each time a little more, until she became accustomed to it. It was a small fault, but one that could grow and become dangerous. God used an unexpected means to cure her. One day, a servant with whom Monica often quarreled in the heat of an argument reproached her for the habit and contemptuously called her a little drunkard. That hurtful word, spoken with malicious intent, was like an arrow that opened Monica's eyes. She was deeply ashamed of herself, acknowledged her fault, and abandoned it at once, forever. She never returned to that failing. Augustine draws from this a lesson full of wisdom, that God sometimes makes use even of the harsh words and ill intentions of others to correct and heal us. That servant wanted to wound her, but God used her insult to heal Monica. This is how divine providence works. It knows how to bring good out of evil and to set our paths straight by means we would never imagine. This episode already shows us Monica's mettle, a woman capable of recognizing her faults and correcting them at the root, without excuses or half measures. That same strength of will, that same humility in allowing herself to be corrected, would accompany her throughout her life and become the secret of her holiness. Whoever knows how to master himself is prepared for the great battles of the soul. When she had grown up, Monica would have desired, in keeping with the devotion of her heart, a life given entirely to God. But, as was customary in those days, her parents arranged a marriage for her, and she was married to a man from the city named Patricius. Thus began the longest and most difficult stage of her life, a trial that would last for many years and in which her faith would be tested in the fire. Let us learn about that marriage. Chapter 3. Marriage to Patricius. The man Monica married, Patricius, was a citizen of Tagaste, hard-working and not without good qualities, but with a very difficult character. He was a pagan, untouched by the Christian faith. He had a violent and impulsive temperament, prone to anger, and he was unfaithful to his wife. To this was added an equally difficult mother-in-law, Patricius's mother, who lived in the household and who at first regarded Monica with suspicion and coldness. It was certainly not an easy home. Monica thus found herself in the midst of an extremely harsh trial, one that would continue for nearly 30 years. Another woman might have grown bitter, answering anger with anger and contempt with contempt. Monica chose another path: patience, gentleness, and prayer. She endured her husband's outbursts without repaying evil with evil, remaining silent when he was inflamed with rage and speaking to him gently when he had calmed down. She never gave him cause for complaint and overcame his bad temper with kindness. In this, Monica admirably embodied the advice of the Apostle St. Peter, who wrote to Christian wives of unbelieving husbands that they should win them over without words, by their conduct alone, through a respectful and chaste life, as taught in St. Peter's first letter, chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. She did not lecture Patrick or overwhelm him with reproaches. She preached through her quiet example, letting kindness speak for her. And that silent preaching ultimately proved the most effective of all. Augustine recounts that many wives in that city, whose husbands were less violent than Patrick, nevertheless bore faces marked by blows, and they marveled that Monica, married to a man so hot-tempered, never suffered such abuse. When they asked her secret, she gave them a wise piece of advice, half joking and half serious: not to irritate their husbands when they were enraged, to know how to remain silent and yield in the heat of anger, and to wait for a calmer moment to make themselves understood. Her patience was, at heart, a form of love and strength. But Monica did not merely endure. Through her quiet example, her constant kindness, and her tireless prayer, she gradually won the hearts of those around her. Her mother-in-law, who had treated her harshly at first, eventually surrendered to Monica's gentleness and came to love her dearly. And Patrick himself, who had witnessed his wife's virtue for years, slowly began to soften. The most beautiful fruit of that patience came at last. Touched by Monica's example and her persevering prayer, Patrick converted to the Christian faith and was baptized shortly before he died. That difficult, pagan, violent man died reconciled with God, won for heaven by his wife's steadfastness. Monica had triumphed, not through reproaches, but through love and prayer. She had converted her own husband through sheer goodness. Several children were born of that marriage, among them the eldest, the most brilliant, and the most dearly loved, Augustine. In the years that followed, all of Monica's love and all of her sorrow would come to center on him. For that son, gifted with extraordinary intelligence, would take a path that would fill his mother's heart with tears. Let us come to know that sorrow. Chapter 4. Tears for Augustine. Of Monica's children, Augustine was the eldest and the most gifted. From childhood, he showed remarkable intelligence, and his parents, recognizing his talent, made great sacrifices to give him the finest education, sending him to study in other cities. Monica dreamed of seeing such a capable son become a good Christian and an upright man. But for years, things took a very different turn. Away from home, amid the atmosphere of the great cities and his studies, Augustine allowed himself to be swept along by the passions of youth. He surrendered to a disorderly life, seeking pleasure and following his desires. He took a partner outside marriage with whom he had a son, and for years lived far from God's law. His restless heart, eager for truth, searched, but it searched along the wrong paths. And it was not only his dissolute life that led Augustine away from the faith, but also error. His proud intellect initially despised the simplicity of the gospel and allowed itself to be seduced by a false doctrine that was widespread at the time, that of the Manichaeans, which promised wisdom and answers, but led people away from the true faith. For years, Augustine followed that sect and defended its errors brilliantly, moving ever farther from his mother's church. For Monica, it was a sword piercing her soul. To see her most beloved son not only given over to a disorderly life, but also separated from the faith and ensnared in error, was the greatest sorrow of her life. Popular Christian traditions say that she wept for him every night, and Augustine himself, in the Confessions, repeatedly speaks of the many tears his mother shed for him, her ceaseless prayers, and her motherly grief, which never ceased by day or by night. It is difficult to imagine the weight of that sorrow, prolonged over so many years. It was not the grief of a single day or a passing misfortune, but an open wound that would not heal, reopened each time new reports arrived of Augustine's straying. And added to the sorrow over his present life was fear for his eternal salvation, which for a believing mother is the greatest fear of all. Monica bore all this for nearly 30 years, without ever ceasing to love her son or to believe in his salvation. But Monica did not weep only from sadness. She wept as she prayed. Every tear was a plea to God for her son's conversion. She did not grow weary, give up, or stop hoping, even when everything seemed lost, and Augustine sank ever deeper. With heroic faith, she continued to trust that one day God would return that son to her, converted. Her perseverance in prayer against all human hope is one of the most admirable things about her life. There were moments when the pain overcame her, and she wanted to drive her wayward son from her home and table, scandalized by his errors. But God sustained her and encouraged her not to despair, using two extraordinary consolations to do so: a dream, and the words of a holy bishop. Let us first learn about that dream, which restored her hope in the middle of the night. Chapter 5. The Dream of the Wooden Rule. In the midst of her pain, when Augustine was most deeply lost in the error of the Manichees, God wished to console Monica with a dream, which she herself told her son, and which Augustine later recorded in the Confessions. It was a simple dream, but full of meaning. It restored her hope and gave her strength to continue praying and waiting through the years that still lay ahead. Monica dreamed that she was standing on a wooden rule, that is, on a beam or strip of wood used for measuring, distressed and weeping. And behold, a radiant young man approached her with a cheerful and serene face. He asked her, not so much to learn the reason as to console her, why she was so sad and why she wept so much. She replied that she was weeping over her son's ruin. Then the young man told her to calm down and look carefully, because where she was, there her son was also. And when she looked, Monica saw Augustine standing beside her, on the same rule. That dream gave Monica a certainty that would never again leave her, that one day her son would be where she was, that is, in the same true faith. When she told Augustine about the dream, he, still trapped in error, tried to turn it to his advantage. With cunning, he told her that perhaps the dream meant that she would come to be where he was, that is, among the Manichees. But Monica replied at once, with a quickness Augustine never forgot, "No, for I was not told that I would be where he is, but that he would be where I am." Augustine would later confess that his mother's swift and certain reply impressed him more than the dream itself. It was as though God's light had spoken through Monica's mouth, giving her a certainty that not even her son's cleverness could twist. That simple woman, enlightened by faith, saw the truth of things more clearly than the brilliant philosopher, and she would not allow the hope God had given her to be taken away. From that dream onward, Monica waited with unshakable confidence, although many more years, nearly 9, would still pass before she saw the promise fulfilled. But she no longer wept without hope. She wept knowing that God would keep his word. The dream of the wooden rule was like a light in the long night of her waiting, a pledge from heaven that sustained her when human strength faltered. Along with that dream, God gave her another consolation, this time through a holy man. Distraught over Augustine's errors, Monica went one day to an elderly bishop and asked him to speak with her son and lead him out of error. And from that meeting came words that would become famous forever. Let us hear them. Chapter 6. A son of so many tears cannot be lost. In her efforts to save Augustine from the errors he was entangled in, Monica was not content merely to pray. She also sought human means. She repeatedly approached learned and holy people, asking them to speak with her son and show him his error, trusting that the words of a wise man might accomplish what she could not. Among them, she went in tears to an elderly bishop, a prudent man well versed in the scriptures, to beg him to debate Augustine and convince him. The bishop, with the wisdom born of experience, refused to do so, and gave her an answer filled with discernment. He told her that Augustine was still too proud and too inflamed by the novelty of that error, and that debating with him while he was in such a state would accomplish nothing, since his pride would reject every argument. It would be better, he said, to let time and experience itself show him his deception, and to trust in God, who would open his eyes in due time. And he told her how he himself, when he was young, had been caught up in that error, and had escaped it by the grace of God. But Monica, with a mother's heart, would not give up. She continued insisting and pleading through her tears that he speak with her son. Then the bishop, somewhat wearied by her persistence but moved by her tears, spoke those words that would remain forever engraved in the memory of the Church. "Go. As surely as you live, it is impossible that a son of so many tears should be lost." And with that he sent her away. Those words were like a voice from heaven to Monica. As Augustine himself recounts, she received them as though God himself had spoken them to her and kept them in her heart as a sure promise. Amid her sorrow, she now had two pledges of hope, the dream of the wooden rule and the bishop's words. Twice heaven had assured her that her son would not be lost, and she clung to that certainty with all her soul. It is beautiful to consider the faith contained in those words. A son of so many tears cannot be lost. They hold a consoling truth for all who pray for a loved one who has strayed from God. They tell us that the tears and prayers of a mother, a father, or a friend do not fall into emptiness, but reach the heart of God and have immense power before Him. No persevering and trusting prayer goes unanswered, even if the answer is slow in coming. And so it was. Sustained by those two promises, Monica continued to pray and hope. But soon the trial would become even harder, because Augustine, seeking fame and better prospects, decided to leave Africa for Italy, for distant Rome. And Monica, unable to bear being separated from the son for whose soul she feared, made a heroic decision: to follow him. Let us learn about that pursuit, born of love. Chapter 7. Pursuing her son to Italy. The time came when Augustine, still unconverted, decided to leave Africa and go to Rome, and then to Milan, seeking a more cultured environment and a better position as a teacher of rhetoric. For Monica, the news was another blow. She feared that, far from her and in foreign lands, her son would sink even deeper into error and a disordered life. She could not bear the thought of being separated from him, and decided to accompany him or follow him, whatever the cost. But Augustine, who did not want to take his mother with him, deceived her so that he could leave without her. Augustine himself recounts with shame and remorse how he tricked her. He pretended that he was only going to say goodbye to a friend who was boarding a ship, and so, using that pretext, he left her on land by the harbor while he set sail during the night. Monica spent that night weeping and praying by the shore, in the place where she had prayed so many times, feeling betrayed by the son she loved so dearly. Augustine would later acknowledge the cruelty of that deception and the pain it caused his mother. But through the eyes of faith, he would also see in it the hand of God. For while Monica wept and begged God to prevent her son from leaving, God, in his wisdom, granted her request in a higher sense, leading Augustine precisely to Milan, where the encounter that would change his life awaited him. God did not give Monica what she was asking for at that moment, in order to give her something far greater: the conversion of her son. Far from giving up after being deceived, Monica did something extraordinary for a woman of her time. She boarded a ship herself and crossed the sea, determined to follow Augustine wherever necessary. She faced the dangers of the voyage, uncertainty, and exhaustion, driven by her love for her son and her desire for his salvation. Augustine recounts that even during a storm at sea, when the sailors feared for their lives, it was Monica who encouraged and comforted them, certain that God would bring her safely to port because she still had a promise to fulfill. When she finally found Augustine in Milan, Monica received news that filled her with quiet joy. Her son was no longer a Manichaean. Augustine had become disillusioned with that sect and abandoned its errors. He had not yet found the truth, but at least he had escaped deception and was seeking sincerely. Monica did not become excited or claim victory too soon. Calmly and faithfully she told him that she believed that, before she left this life, she would see him become a Christian and a Catholic. She was certain of God's promise. In Milan, Providence had prepared the instrument of Augustine's conversion, a holy and wise bishop whose words would finally open the heart of Monica's son. His name was Ambrose, and he too would be a source of comfort and guidance for Monica. Let us learn about that decisive encounter with Saint Ambrose and the light of Milan. Chapter 8. Saint Ambrose and the light of Milan. Saint Ambrose was the bishop of Milan, one of the church's great saints and doctors, a man of profound holiness, wisdom, and eloquence. Augustine, who was a teacher of rhetoric, began attending his sermons, at first merely out of curiosity, to admire his way of speaking, but without realizing it, along with the words, the truth those words contained began to enter his heart. Little by little, Ambrose's preaching demolished Augustine's prejudices against the Catholic faith. Monica, for her part, deeply venerated St. Ambrose and loved him as an angel of God, because she saw in him the man who was leading her son toward the faith. Ambrose, too, esteemed Monica and never tired of praising her faith and virtue to Augustine, congratulating the son on having such a holy mother. That devout and fervent woman had won the esteem of the great bishop. One episode clearly shows Monica's humility and docility. Following the custom she had brought from Africa, she used to take offerings of bread and wine to the tombs of saints and martyrs. But that custom was not practiced in Milan, and Bishop Ambrose had forbidden it, among other reasons, because it could lead to excess in drinking and because it, too, closely resembled certain pagan practices. When Monica learned that this was the bishop's will, she immediately abandoned the custom without resistance and in perfect obedience. Augustine highlights with admiration that docility of his mother. Someone attached to her traditions would have resisted or complained. Monica, by contrast, willingly submitted her piety to the judgment of the Church, preferring obedience to her own customs. She gladly exchanged material offerings for better offerings. She brought to the martyrs' tombs a heart full of prayers and good works, and she helped the poor. Her piety was humble and docile, not stubborn or capricious. Monica's docility contains a great lesson. True piety does not consist in stubbornly clinging to one's own customs, however good they may seem, but in loving and obeying the Church, always preferring its judgment to one's own opinion. Monica, a woman of deep faith, knew that humility and obedience are worth more than any particular devotion, and so her piety was pleasing to God because she did not seek to do her own will, but the will of God and of His Church. Meanwhile, an increasingly intense battle was being waged in Augustine's soul. The truth was gradually winning him over, but his old habits and passions held him back, and he hesitated, struggling with himself, unable to take the final step. He already knew what the truth was, but he did not dare embrace it completely, because he found it difficult to renounce his former life. In the meantime, Monica prayed and waited, sensing that the hour was drawing near. And the hour came. After a wrenching interior struggle, Augustine experienced the decisive moment of his conversion, that celebrated episode in which, weeping in a garden, he heard a voice saying to him, "Take and read," and, when he opened the Scriptures, found the words that finally surrendered his heart to God. Monica's long wait was coming to an end. Let us learn how the promise was fulfilled, Augustine's conversion and baptism. Chapter 9. Conversion and Baptism. After years of searching and interior struggle, Augustine finally surrendered to God. In a garden in Milan, amid a wrenching crisis, weeping over his inability to break with his former life, he heard what sounded like a child's voice repeating, "Take and read, take and read." Taking it as a sign from heaven, he opened the book of the letters of the Apostle St. Paul and read the first words he came across, which urged him to abandon the disorders of the flesh and put on Christ. Those words entered his heart like a light, and all his doubt vanished. Augustine was converted. The first thing he did was go and tell his mother. When Monica learned that her son had not only abandoned error, but was giving himself entirely to God and renouncing his former life, her joy was indescribable. Augustine recounts that his mother was filled with joy and blessed God, who can do more than we ask or understand, for she saw fulfilled, and abundantly so, everything she had asked for through so many years of tears. God had granted her far more than she had dared to hope. To prepare for baptism, Augustine withdrew with a group of friends and relatives to a country house called Cassiciacum near Milan, where they spent several months in peaceful living, devoted to prayer, study, and conversations about God and the truth. And there was Monica among them, taking part in those conversations with a wisdom that astonished everyone. Although she did not have the education of those learned men, her faith and experience of God gave her a depth that Augustine admired and recorded in his writings. When Easter of the year 387 arrived, Monica's lifelong desire was finally fulfilled. In the city of Milan, St. Ambrose baptized Augustine, together with his son Adeodatus and his friend Alypius. That son for whom Monica had wept and prayed for nearly 30 years, that son lost in error and disorder, was now reborn through baptism as a child of God. The promise of the dream and the bishop's words were fulfilled. Augustine was finally where his mother was, in the true faith. We can imagine Monica's joy on that day. A lifetime of tears and waiting had found its reward there. Her perseverance had not been in vain. Not one of her prayers had fallen into emptiness. God, faithful to his promises, was giving her back her converted son, and not merely converted, but called to become one of the pillars of the church. Monica had won the most important battle of her life, the battle for her son's soul. With their hearts filled with that joy, mother and son prepared to return to Africa. They set out on their journey and arrived at the port of Ostia, near Rome, where they waited for the ship that would take them home. But something awaited them at Ostia that neither of them could have imagined. A moment of heavenly light, and, shortly afterward, a farewell. Let us discover that sublime moment, the vision of Ostia. Chapter 10. The Vision of Ostia. At Ostia, while they waited for the ship that would take them back to Africa, mother and son experienced together one of the most beautiful and mysterious moments in all of Christian history, which St. Augustine describes movingly in his Confessions. One day, the two of them were alone, leaning out of a window overlooking an inner garden of the house, speaking gently about the things of God and what the eternal life of the saints would be like. As they spoke, gradually rising from earthly things to those of heaven, they ascended in thought and desire toward God, leaving behind everything created, until, for an instant, in a surge of the heart, they managed, as Augustine recounts, to brush against that eternal wisdom who is God himself. It was as if, for a moment, heaven opened before them, and they tasted in advance the sweetness of eternal life. Then, sighing, they returned to words and to the world below. That sublime conversation, known as the Vision of Ostia, is one of the most beautiful pages in the Confessions and in all Christian literature. Mother and son, now united not only by blood but by the same faith, contemplated together for an instant the destination toward which they were both journeying. It was the mature fruit of an entire lifetime. The mother who had wept over her lost son now contemplated with him in the same faith the glory of heaven. After that moment, Monica said a few words to her son that revealed the peace of her soul. She confessed that nothing now held her to this life, that she no longer knew what she was doing here, or why she should go on living, since all her earthly hopes had been fulfilled. Before she died, she had desired only one thing, to see her son become a Christian and a Catholic, and God had granted this to her beyond all measure, for she also saw him completely devoted to him, scorning the things of the world. She had nothing more to ask for. Those words were almost a farewell. Monica had reached the summit of her life. She had fulfilled her mission. She had seen the son for whom she had suffered so greatly brought to salvation. Her heart was at peace, filled with God, with no desire beyond heaven. The vision of Ostia was like the final gift God wished to give her on this earth, before calling her to the eternal and unending vision. Indeed, just a few days later, Monica fell ill. Let us learn about her holy death. Chapter 11. Death at Ostia and Her Legacy. A few days after the vision of Ostia, Monica fell ill with a fever. She soon understood that the end had come, and she received it with the same serenity with which she had lived. In earlier days, she had wished to be buried in her homeland, in Africa, beside her husband Patricius. She had even taken care to arrange her burial there. But now, filled with God, all that seemed unimportant to her, when her saddened children worried that she might die far from her homeland and not be buried in her native land, Monica said a few words to them that showed how completely she had detached herself from everything. She asked them to bury her right there, wherever she died, without worrying about the place, because nothing is far from God, and there was no reason to fear that, at the end of the world, the Lord would not know where to find her in order to raise her up. Bury this body anywhere, she told them. The only thing she asked was that they remember her before the Lord's altar, at Holy Mass, wherever they might be. That request reveals the deepest part of her faith. The place of her grave did not matter to her. What mattered was being remembered in prayer and in the sacrifice of the Mass. She knew that what unites the living and the dead is not the closeness of their tombs, but the communion of the Church and prayer for one another. And so, after 9 days of illness, Monica gave her soul to God in Ostia at the age of 56, in that same year, 387, when she had seen her life's desire fulfilled. Augustine, who loved her dearly, felt immense sorrow, and in the Confessions he describes with deep emotion his grief, his tears first held back and then shed, and his prayer for his mother's soul. But his grief was filled with faith and hope, because he knew where his mother now was, not lost, but won forever, rejoicing in that God whom together they had glimpsed in the vision at Ostia. The mother who had given him birth for earth and, through her tears, given him birth again for heaven, now went before him in glory. The body of St. Monica was buried in Ostia. Centuries later, according to tradition, her relics were transferred, and today they are venerated in Rome in the Church of St. Augustine, near those of her spiritual son, mother, and son united in the veneration of the Church as they had been in life. Her memory has only grown over the centuries. Throughout the ages, countless anguished mothers and fathers have turned to St. Monica, asking her to intercede for their children who have strayed from the faith. In her, they have found not only a powerful intercessor, but also a companion who understands their pain, because she herself experienced it to the fullest. And many have seen in time what once seemed impossible come to pass in their own families, just as it did in Monica's, a loved one's return to God. The Church has given St. Monica as a model and patron saint of Christian mothers, of suffering wives, and of all who pray for the conversion of a loved one. Her life is an unforgettable lesson in patience, perseverance in prayer, and trust in God against all hope. From her we learn that no prayer is ever lost, that no loved one is definitively lost as long as there is someone praying for them, and that tears shed before God out of love possess a power that heaven does not disdain. Let us conclude by placing ourselves under her protection with a prayer of trust. Chapter 12. Prayer to Saint Monica. Saint Monica, Mother of Tears and Hope, you who prayed tirelessly for many years for the conversion of your son Augustine, and never gave up, even when everything seemed lost, teach us to persevere in prayer and never to despair of God's mercy. You who patiently and gently endured the hardships of a difficult marriage, and won your husband and all those around you for Christ through your goodness and example. Obtain for us the strength to overcome evil with good, anger with gentleness, and impatience with love. Mother of all who pray for a loved one estranged from God, look upon all who weep and plead today, as you once wept, for a lost son, husband, father, or friend. Remind them that a child of so many tears cannot be lost, and sustain their hope when their strength falters and the answer seems slow to come. Pray for our families, for marriages in difficulty, for mothers who suffer, for young people who have lost their way, and for all who seek the truth without having found it yet. May they, like your son Augustine, at last find rest in that God in whom the heart alone finds rest. And just as you and your son together contemplated at Ostia a glimpse of eternal life, lead us also with our loved ones to the joyful contemplation of God in heaven, where there will be no more tears or separation, but only the endless joy of those who are saved. Saint Monica, mother of Saint Augustine and patroness of Christian mothers, pray for us.